This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. We are talking to Robert Bonnet from Macau, China, where he works as a chief pilot for a company. He was born in Mexico, had dual citizenship because his dad was American. He moved to the States in 2001, and in 2008, he took the opportunity to go to China. He's been writing since he was a teenager, but in the 80s, writing is what kept his sanity. The name of his book, Inspiration. So what was going on in the 80s?
Because I was staying several months a year in different hotels throughout the world. So instead of becoming crazy and climbing up the walls, I started writing to God, basically, just to try to find some sense in what I was doing. I had small children at the time, so it was not really that easy. So that's what triggered all of this. This book is actually a collection of essays.
It's letters to God about how to get through this period of time.
It started like this, but throughout the years it changed into something else, and I just decided to start to write things that maybe people could use, people that are going through the same issues that I had. It's just passing tips on how to make things easier on yourself, because we all have a lot of burdens and conflicts and challenges with our respective lives. So
give me a for instance.
For example, frustrations with stress, which are challenges that you identify, but you don't have the tools to solve them. So these things linger for days, and they linger for weeks and for months. After a while, it's kind of like holding a bottle of water. You hold this bottle of water for 10 minutes, it's fine. If you hold it for 2 months, it's unbearable. So these things may not seem that bad initially, but after a while, when they become gigantic, the stress of dealing with routine, the issues of not getting through the people you have to get through in order to reach a task. Or it's not only that, it's also family, being away from your family because of the profession. On one hand, you have these blessings. I mean, I was flying all over the world. I was flying in Asia for the last 11 years. It's beautiful. It's just amazing. On the other hand, I was away from my home for so long. And my children grew up. They got married. They're living in different cities. So these are things that happen because I was away for so long, maybe 8 months a year, and they just got used to it. I had 2 different jobs, one with the Olympic Committee and another one with this family that owned several companies in Mexico, and they would spend long time in Europe every year. It ended up being about 8 months a year for one job lasted 7 years, the other one lasted 6 years. So
wow.
That took care of a childhood that I would have liked to have had with to share with my kids, but I couldn't.
So how do you suggest that people deal with these stressors? One of them was through writing about your anxiety.
Yes, this is something that my book has in several chapters. I was managing several pilots and cabin crews here, and every pilot came from another country because Macau doesn't have any pilots. Macau is a very small place, and the way I was dealing with these things was I tried to talk with them because they started drifting away. They would get involved in addictions, and they would get involved in looking for love in the wrong places. And I understand the reasons why loneliness is not easy. And this is something that you just cannot really understand until you live it. And some people are not that resourceful, I think. They will go and try to find an easy fix, which ends up dragging a lot of problems into their lives and their families' lives. So it just makes matters worse. So I saw a lot of horror stories regarding the mental stability of people. They were just losing it. And these were kind of the challenges I was also having to deal with. So to me, they were eye-openers because I was trying to help on one hand. On some occasions I could, on some occasions I couldn't. On the other hand, you would see the people that did not open up enough would just go down the bottom. So it's been an interesting set of experiences that being far has allowed me to witness. So this is what I'm putting in my books.
So do you make any recommendations in your book?
Don't go for the money. Don't go for the money. But, in my particular case, it was difficult because I had these discussions with my former wife. And she would tell me, I don't want to be in a cage made of gold. I want your company. Stop working those places. Don't make so much money and just try to spend more time with us. And I said, I understand what you're saying. I don't want to be away for so long. But in this profession, if you have a medical issue, they take away your wings. And then a pilot who receives a big salary and all the benefits and you name it, you take away the wings and it's useless. It's good for nothing. So I said, I would like to reach an age where I can actually have enough resources to start a business or something and then not just leave aviation altogether. But it was interesting because she was a cabin crew. So she knows how this works. But I'm not pointing a finger at her. I never did. Her remarks were correct, and I just had to make a decision. I said, if I come back home and I get a little job here and to be more time with you and with the kids, it may not be the solution in the middle, in the midterm. We may have an issue regarding money, regarding something that, for example, if I have a health issue, what are we going to do if we have no savings? It's going to be a disaster. And actually, I did have a health issue. So we had the resources to pull out, but after a couple of years, divorce came. So the resources went. Obviously, we had to split them, and I gave her half. And so it's an interesting set of lessons and conclusion. You try to do things always with the best of your intentions, but we learn as we walk.
It's so true. And when you finally learn how to walk, sometimes it's too late. Thank you so much, Robert. John H. Stoneberg IV is a defense program analyst at the Pentagon, where he uses models to figure out how many Army units we need to support the national strategy. He's also a father of 6. He finished his book entitled Kilo 17 years ago, and you decided to publish it now because?
Timing was right. And I saw a advertisement for Page on TV once, like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, well, maybe I'll give them a shot. So I tried a couple other publishers, and no one was biting, and it's just a matter of prioritization. So early in my career, I was in the Ranger Battalion, which is kind of the source for the people and the characters in the book. And I was thinking about some of the things that we had trained to do, and I was like, this might be an interesting story to pull on. And I just started writing. No outline, nothing, just started pecking away on the computer, and it kind of fleshed itself out. So it's about a couple of friends that used to be in the Army Rangers. One of the guys, family member, gets killed by some drug dealers. So they decide to all get out of the Army and go hunt down drug dealers with the intent of taking the money to finance their operations and eliminate the drugs and the drug dealers.
Taking the law into their own hands, vigilantes.
Oh, yeah, vigilantes, right. So then tied into that is obviously the FBI is interested because you have vigilantes going out there that are very effective. Then there's the whole story plot line with the drug dealers and the main drug dealer who's actually linked to one of the FBI agents as the only bad guy he ever lost or got away. So, all the 3 main plots kind of all come together towards right at the end. The main characters on the vigilante side, they start taking down houses in Southern California, which is where I grew up in Southern California. The drug houses were run by a large cartel of which the kingpin was in jail at an undisclosed location, which happened to be Alaska, which I had spent time living in Alaska as well. That's why I chose Alaska. And the FBI team sets up a joint effort between the LAPD and one of the FBI agents who had actually lost this kingpin from his custody. So the two of them are trying to figure out how these vigilantes are taking down these houses and catching them. The plot twist at the end is that the FBI really doesn't want to arrest them. They want to hire them. So I had started writing kind of another chapter, and I'm like, no, that really needs to be another book. So it kind of ends and sets it up for a second book. I just haven't written the second book yet.
You think you're going to do that now?
It depends on how well this one does. I mean, it's a matter of time for me. So, I pretty much from the time I leave my house till I get home is 12, 13 hours a day. And I've got young children at home, so it's really a matter of time.
Kilo. That's just the name of your book, Kilo. As in cocaine? Is that the drugs that you're dealing with?
As in, yeah. So my working title, which I hated the whole time writing it, was Kilo Team 7, kind of a play off of Rainbow Six.
Okay.
And I really didn't like the working title. And so when I called Paige and the person working with me is like, well, I need a title. And I'm like, well, just use Kilo. And then it was like, oh, that actually sounds kind of good. My intent has always been to take all the proceeds and use it to set up a scholarship. If you were to look at the dedication page, it's a friend of mine who was killed in Mogadishu.
Okay.
I set up the scholarship before I got the book published, so now it's kind of, free chicken. So whatever I can do now is just more than I was doing before. So.
That's really nice, John. Thank you. Stephen Smith is semi-retired and living in Maryland. He started writing a decade ago when people told him he had a story he really needed to share. It's entitled Bullied Nearly to Death, Loving My Life.
The story is about how I grew up being bullied and how the bullying led to my attempting 4 different suicides, and then how I managed to, through a near-death experience, I managed to turn my life around and turn into something positive to be able to help other people.
Why were you bullied?
I really don't know. It all started on kindergarten. One boy turned into several people picking on me. It just grew from there. All because the very first day of kindergarten, I went to introduce myself to another boy that was playing by himself, and he just picked up a fishbowl and dumped it on me. And then he killed the fish and then blamed me for killing the fish. And I got in trouble for it. And then from that day on, everybody looked at me as being the troublemaker.
Okay.
So, and it also happened at home. My father and my sister bullied me at home, and it got pretty fierce at times.
What'd they do?
So, my dad would occasionally kick me, threw me down some stairs several times. But worse than the physical stuff was the mental stuff where he would actually tell me I was stupid, tell me I would never amount to anything. He rarely ever even hinted at a compliment. It wasn't until shortly before he died that he actually said he was proud of me. That was the first and only time I ever remember him saying that.
There was no one you could go to?
Several of the teachers believed that I was a troublemaker, so the teachers wouldn't help me. I went to local police and fire department people, but everybody knew my parents from the church that we went to. So the church members, the police, the fire department, they all knew who my parents were and knew them as being good, helpful people in the church. So therefore, that couldn't happen. And of course, the excuse that's even heard today of, well, bullying doesn't happen in our schools. And that's what I was listening to.
How were you able to get help?
By going into the Army. My first suicide attempt was actually in 4th grade. And then my last one was in 9th or 10th grade. And then I went into the Army, and during training, I learned from my captain and my drill sergeants that I was actually a born leader. I became the company leader for 400 men. So all of a sudden I was put in a position of leadership. And then about a month and a half into training, I collapsed and I blacked out. And 2.5 days later, when I woke up, I was told that I had no vital signs. Good part of an hour, and they were doing CPR on me the whole time. I had this experience, this vision, literally my life flashing before my eyes and different events happening in my life, good and bad. And when I came out of that and everything, I started really thinking about it, and I started focusing on what happened in my life and how can I make my life into something positive. It's been a very interesting experience because people hear about what my story is about, then they start telling me their stories, how my story is touching their lives. And I hear from numerous people, including I've got a lot of teachers who have read my book, and they're like, your book needs to be in every school across the country.
It sure does, Stephen, especially with all of the focus today on bullying. You give people a lot of hope. Thank you. Richard Resendez is a retired custodial maintenance worker at Brown University. He lives in Rhode Island, and he wrote a sci-fi comedy 35 years ago, lost it, then found it again. Just about the time he heard about Page Publishing. And now we bring you Ground of the Devil.
It's a science fiction hardcore comedy. It's about a meteorite that crashed into Moodus, Connecticut, and a creature came out of it looking like the devil. It looked like a bear. It was a female, had the breast and everything, and the lobster claws. And it had elephant feet that kicks. It sprays fire, has a stinger that stings, and it attacks so many different ways. Kills animals, people, just levels his town. It's a horror comedy. It's funny and scary at the same time.
What inspired this?
When I was listening to TV a long time ago, there was a show called PM Magazine, and they were talking about the Moodus, Connecticut noises. They have the caves, sandstone or something. Now, when the water hits them, it triggers these earthquakes, and the native Indians believed it was the devil years ago. So that made me think of Ground of the Devil. But I need to find a way to make a book out of it. And then there was another story about an asteroid that struck in Connecticut a long time ago. So that made me think of the devil will come from another planet, and then it'll go on its attack in Moodus.
And you put it all together in this book.
Yep.
When you were in your 30s and lost it. Okay.
I lost it, then I found it again, and now I'm getting into writing again.
So after you lost the manuscript, you didn't keep writing?
No. I was busy with bowling leagues, 3 bowling leagues. I go to the beach a lot. I have a handicapped wife I need to take care of.
Okay.
And that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Any more about the creature that looked like a huge porcupine with large female breasts that sprays fire like a dragon, has a large tail and powerful stinger, and lobster-like claws, and feet like an elephant?
Yeah. I have plans of doing a sequel, depending on what this is, because I got a lot more to write.
Okay.
I'm writing a script. I got 18 pages done so far about a hurricane that gets trapped over a volcano.
All right.
And it seems like the book is selling. I've done 2 at Barnes & Noble in Smithfield, Rhode Island.
Okay.
The first one I sold 15 books, and the second one I sold 14.
That's great.
Yeah.
So people like your stuff and people know who you are.
Apparently, yes. Yep. And copies that I had out of my car, like 5 or 6 copies, I was able to sell those.
What'd you do?
Be at the beach, like a couple of friends that wanted it or something like that, and they said, I can't wait to get this book. And I give them a choice that you could get it on Amazon or you could get it on Barnes & Noble. Or I got a couple of copies, the 10 copies that they sent me.
In your beach bag.
Right, yeah.
All right, Richard, way to go. We have to take a short break, but we are coming right back. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Attention all authors. Page Publishing is looking for authors. Have you written a book and want to get it published? Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, Apple iTunes, and other outlets. They handle all aspects of the publishing process for you: printing, cover art, publicity, copyright, and editing. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. That's 800-204-6099 for your free author submission kit.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Thomas Blackwell was a private investigator in Houston for nearly 50 years. In the early 90s, he worked with the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, went to the Mideast, then Moscow in 1991. And therein lies his story involving former Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, and an attempted takeover by the hardline Communist Party.
It is a photographic history of the 3 days of the attempted coup d'etat, where Gorbachev abandoned his office and hid out at his Black Sea dacha with some special security people. And at the same time, Yeltsin had just been elected as president of the Confederation of Independent States, which was 15 of the 21 states of the USSR. And the usurpers who tried to take over after Gorbachev abandoned the USSR sent the Red Army to eliminate Yeltsin, and they intended to eliminate Gorbachev as well. The hard-line communists were just going to take over the USSR, and it did not succeed because Yeltsin wound up arbitrarily going over to the Kremlin and taking over Mr. Gorbachev's seat of power.
And why were you there?
I was with the Bureau of Diplomatic Security at the American Embassy as a security specialist.
So you watched all of this unfold, and you were able to take pictures of it.
Right. We made 100 pictures on the 3 days of August 19th, 20th, and 21st, 1991. I had a team of 10 security people who had the same assignment that I had. And we went out on the streets and made pictures all through those 3 days. And the Department of State asked me to write an article and use as many of those pictures as I could. And they wanted it for their State 13 building. And American citizens who were going to travel to foreign countries could visit there and go into that area that was like a library, and they could read things like my article, with which I put 50 pictures into it, and letters and reports that were written by American citizens who had visited the country of their destination. And they could go in there and they could check them out and read them, but they could not take them out of the building and they could not make copies of them.
Okay.
So that's why I wrote the original article, which later became the book that Page Publishing became interested in. I couldn't find a publisher. I tried a half a dozen different Times. I wrote to a dozen publishers, and nobody was interested in it because of this title, Mutiny in Moscow, 1991. The word mutiny was what they were not interested in. So it took me like 26 years to find Page Publishing, who said, yeah, we don't mind using the word mutiny.
So you do go out and you do talk about this experience.
I do. I'm a Masonic member, and I speak at Masonic lodges everywhere I go because I found out that Masonry was still alive and well in Moscow after 74 years of murderous depression. There's some Masonic history in the book, along with some history of Russia before the end of World War II and leading up to modern-day revelations that have never been published in the American mass media.
Well, it is now. Thanks, Thomas. Anna Ree from Akron, Georgia, retired law enforcement and 911 operator, says every call is a story, and she's documented a whole lot of them in her book entitled Measure for Measure.
It's about women in law enforcement and just women in particular, and also about mental illness. It follows these women through probably about 40 years of life. And it starts out when my main character is in her 20s, and she experiences a sexual assault, and how she rises above it and goes beyond that and learns not to be a victim but to be a survivor. And there's a big mindset difference in both of those. And these women have just been amazing to me. I mean, the stories they tell and their courage. And I think that's what I was trying to get across to everybody, was the courage it entails. She winds up being in dispatch, and a matter of fact, that one of the stories is that we had a rapist in the area, long story short, and he kept calling dispatch, and mentally he wanted to be caught, but he was taunting us for years, and I'm taking the calls every night, and he would stay on the line along with me just enough to taunt us. And the last night that he called, when we caught him, he was actually in the backyard of the police department at a cell phone talking to me and looking through the window at me. These are the stories that it's a success, and nobody really hears that about law enforcement anymore. I worked in Amber Alert where we found the young lady here in Ackworth. The guy was from Florida, connected with her on the internet, which just terrifies me, went to Ohio to pick her up and took her from her home at 14 years of age. Oh. And we found her in Ackworth, Georgia, of all places, at Walmart. We do it, try to teach people as well. We don't do it just to aggrandize ourselves. What I wanted to get across to everybody was these people that you see in uniform that you may dislike because they gave you a ticket one day might be the person that's saving your dad's life when he's having a heart attack. And the person that you're yelling and screaming at because you've been in an accident on the phone is me. And I might go from I've locked my keys in my car to I just shot my husband. It's in 2.4 seconds. Every phone call is different. My book is about that, and it's about women and how we can support each other. We're so jealous of each other that I think we overlook how strong we are. God, if we put our minds to it, can you imagine what we could do?
Yeah. I know what we could do.
It's really funny because I've taken the book, obviously, into work. My boss bought one, and she wanted me to autograph it, which just cracked me up because I've never had that experience before. But they're all sitting there reading it, trying to figure out who's who.
You gotta love it, Anna. Thank you. Nothing like a near-death experience to get you thinking about how you want to be remembered by your family. Mark Corwin almost died in a car accident in 2010 after a successful career as a CPA, a CFO, and small business owner in San Diego. His lifelong love of comic books is evident in his book entitled The Optical Lasso, Beware of Neptune's Dark Side. And it all really started with a series of emails.
I took a cruise across the Atlantic, and I listened to a speaker on board who talked about that everyone should write a diary so that future generations know who they are, because oftentimes that gets lost. And I said, well, maybe the best way for me to do that would be to write a book that shows them my imagination and creativity of what I really kind of think about most of the time. So I just sat down and just started writing. It started as a series of emails to relatives that I have in Boston, and they really liked what I was sending them, and the emails actually ended up morphing into a book. one of the main creatures is called the goth. I love the goth. They're like a bat-like creature, 4 feet tall, with accordion-style wings that expand out 20 feet in length. And they've got an octopus-type suction force, and they just wrap their wings around you and they pull you in. And they're so strong they can just turn your body inside out. And then they like to eat your internal organs while you're still alive.
Oh.
And that thought came from when I was young. My dad owned a music store, and they had this horror album on that old show called Lights Out. It's an old horror science fiction kind of show that was on the radio back in the late 30s, 40s. And they had an episode called The Dark, where they had a room that if you walked inside of it, it would turn you inside out. So in the year 2140, Earth is in a war that it's losing. Surprise attack by someone they don't even know. And there's a planet that appears at the same time on the far end of the galaxy called Vixus. And Vixus is the only known planet in the universe that reverses its rotation periodically. And the team from Earth decides that if they can figure out the power source that takes this planet that's like the size of Saturn and it is able to reverse its rotation, they might be able to win the war. So they send a military ship out to explore it, and they find out something perhaps even more dangerous, what's attacking them on Earth. And the book just takes off from there. And there is an underlying message of hope and optimism. For example, one of the main characters, as a 6-year-old child, he's dying of a rare blood disorder. And he is miraculously cured and kind of becomes a superhero. And because he's so smart now, he's figured out what the title of the book is. It's called The Optical Lasso. And he has created this invention that can see into the past. So he sees into the future, and that's when he sees the attack that is taking place on Earth that he wants to try to prevent. There's a very good science fiction specialty bookstore here in San Diego. So they've expressed an interest in having me participate in a local author roundtable kind of thing they put on a couple times a year, which includes a book signing. So I'll probably participate in that. And I've hired a book consultant just to see what I can do with this book now that it seems like it's going to be fairly successful.
You got some imagination there, Mark. I will tell you that. And you know what? We got to go. This is the Page Publishing Book Club. Thanks for listening. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini.